The following is a preview of the New Models podcast.
From Berlin to your block since 2018.
Full episodes are available only to subscribers, and there's hundreds more in our archive.
Join now on newmodels.substack.com or patreon.com/newmodels.
And you know the New Models Discord is popping. Patreon only. Stop sleeping and subscribe now.
New Models. You won't get it anywhere else. You're now locked in with New Models.
Simulation fantasies and thinking that the world's a simulation is because you're operating at a level of abstraction that many people don't operate at.
Zero G.
Of course, if you can just say anything and you have all the financial leverage in the world behind you, literally all the financial leverage, and you just say whatever, and people are like, yeah, then you are kind of living in a simulation.
Yeah,
You're not wrong.
Welcome to New Models. On this episode, we're joined in Berlin by a returning guest, the artist Simon Denny, who this May published a compelling feature in the so-back Artforum magazine titled Epic Fury, Palantir, Anduril, and the Aesthetics of Avant-Garde Fascism. The piece looks at the American defense tech sector's newfound dedication to aesthetics, particularly Italian Futurism, return-to-order neoclassicism, and the graphic idiom of modernist institutions, positioning itself as a progressive counter-elite and priming the public to receive its revanchist turn toward militarism as natural, just, and inevitable. The essay comes out of a body of work that Simon is currently showing in Venice as part of the Strange Rules show at Palazzo Diedo, Berggruen Arts and Culture, and also a solo show in Munich titled Rules-Based Order at Kraupa-Tuskany-Ziedler. Our conversation with Simon starts with a discussion of his art, and then, in classic New Model style, twists and turns along all sorts of arcane paths towards the brave new world we're clearly entering. I'm Lil Internet, joined by my co-host Carly Busta. Our guest is artist Simon Denny. Let's get into it.
Simon Denny, welcome back to New Models.
Thank you. It's great to be here again.
I think this is your third time on
I
this
believe
podcast?
it's number 3.
I think it's number 3.
Yeah.
Well, we're so lucky that you live in Berlin. So we
Just down the street.
Every time there's
Same
like a new
berserk,
body of work.
right?
Yeah, Mitte?
Yeah.
Mitte Moabit. I think we're like technically on the border.
We're technically
Moabit.
We're on the border of Kreuzberg too, so it's kind of where it's at either end of Mitte.
That's right. Okay. But you're also a new dad. Congratulations
Thank you.
to you and MP.
Shout out little Kika.
Welcome, Kika. We all just got back from Venice. We just recorded with Joshua Citarella and also Trevor Paglin. We were all part of this wonderful show that Matt Dryhurst and Holly Herndon, together with Hans Ulrich Obrist and Adriana Rispoli, curated at the Diedo Foundation in Venice, the Berggruen Arts and Culture. Fabulous show on basically the rules that direct culture.
Yeah. Really smart framing. Really happy to be part of that.
Same. I really feel like it's such a fresh angle to think about like what artwork is now, what it can be, and maybe we can get into some of that later. But so we are here to talk about this body of work that we just saw installed in Venice. Mm-hmm. You also wrote a banger of a feature for Artforum. Artforum is very back, by the way. The new co-editors, Daniel Wenger and Rachel Wetzler, are killing it.
Yeah, they were awesome to work with on this also.
Totally beautiful edit. Also just feels like a really nice distillation of a lot of the things that have informed this current body of work.
Yeah.
So we thought you'd come on and
so
share what's in your
back.
head.
I listened to every single episode and all the time informing our discourse. I feel very lucky to be part of the conversation. So,
well,
Thank
awesome.
you.
A good place to start is probably your current body of work, which takes as its subject matter the retro-futurist aesthetics deployed by top defense tech security firms like Anduril and Palantir. Before we get into what your works are, shall we set the scene a little bit?
Yeah.
Like, why defense tech? Why is this trending?
Yeah.
Like, obvious reasons it's trending in the news. I mean, Iran and Ukraine and there are a number of conflicts which require countries to rethink security. But on an aesthetic level, it also seems to have infiltrated
Also quite
the discourse.
literally trending on X.com
Yeah,
all the
like,
time.
For sure.
Exactly. You know, even we were just in Munich this past January at DLD. I mean, I think, Julian, you pointed out that ESG, or maybe you did.
The like peak vibe shift moment. There was this European VC on stage talking about defense tech investment, and he mentioned how ESG, which was the environment, social governance, it was like a framework for investing incentivized by the state, you know, focus on companies that with sustainability in mind. And he said, you know, the S in ESG now stands for security. And that's like literally become true on a policy level since the Ukraine war began.
And on a visual level, actually, they're like the first time I ever saw fatigues or whatever, you know, military uniforms on stage at DLD as well, which was, I think, a really big visual moment for me because I've been looking at DLD.
Or was it someone?
It was the new chair of the Munich Security Conference, and it was a statement, right? He wore
not a suit.
It's not a suit. It was like, again, fatigues is the wrong word, but like a dress uniform for military people.
Command officer.
He was like wearing that on stage as a statement, which is also even more provocative in Germany, where there's been a taboo on militarization for decades for obvious reasons.
Right.
You know?
I mean, this is Munich. I think like a block or two away is like where Hitler got on stage and declared
everybody's very aware of that in this country.
Right.
Yeah. So doing that is a real statement.
Yeah.
Like it was a real thing.
So why? Like, why is this? Talk to us about this.
Thank you for, well, first of all, it's like maybe why the hell I'm talking about it is a really good place to start because my methodology in general came early from a realization that is maybe a protocol art realization that the people who are making the technology, like the consumer tech I was using, had a lot of cultural power, you know? So since I moved to Frankfurt and went to Städelschule, you know, it was pre-iPhone.
So it was 2009? Seven. Right.
And my laptop was really important and all the kind of things I was doing online. I wasn't even on Facebook then, right? I was on Friendster.
I had Friendster.
Yeah. And I had to be persuaded.
Of like Wired magazine, I want to say, was like, I think it was Wired. It was like Friendster, more addictive than crack.
Yeah.
Facebook was like just whatever, this like college thing.
Yeah.
Friendster was really like the incumbent for a while. Yeah.
So I met artists at the time then who were like, oh, wow, cool. We can do new things with the mechanisms of social media. That's great. Like, let's design things that are kind of medium specific for like what's emergent in social media. But I was always like, oh, but who's making the social media?
Right.
You know, like, what are these people? What are they about? What are they interested in? You know, so I've followed that through in my timeline, you know, with the exhibitions and projects I made over the years from social media era to crypto era to whatever. And like the same actors that I'd been following for a long time, the kind of capital allocators, the people that decide what should be funded in the technology world.
Andreessen Horowitz.
Well, yeah, like these VCs are really influential, and Andreessen Horowitz is a more recent phenomenon, than, you know, like
Peter Thiel, others who are VCs,
but it's like these guys decide what should be funded in terms of technology companies. Basically, you know, they have a very outsized influence, and suddenly the attention of this group was much more explicitly turning to funding weapons companies and not only funding them, but also kind of narrativizing.
When did you first notice that?
Well, I mean, it hit me the most when Mark Andreessen wrote this manifesto. I mean, Mark
Andreessen's really a religious text, to be honest.
I mean, it's really, I mean, Mark Andreessen, he's one of these crossover figures that is, I think, you know, really interesting in the way that he postures because he's not only a founder originally, right? He made Netscape, the original browser, commercial browser in the 90s, but also he became a VC, you know, in the 2010s and co-founded Andreessen Horowitz. And then the opening text for that was Software Eats the World. You know, that was published in 2011. Interestingly enough, in the Wall Street Journal. So they chose a mainstream media outlet to publish that at the time, which was really important. There was this very interesting woman who designed that media strategy at the time with them.
Quickly, we're giving a few notes in post-production, one of which is the name of this woman, Margit van Makkers. She is the so-called silent third partner of Andreessen Horowitz and was responsible for this article appearing in the Wall Street Journal, as well as A16Z developing an editorial arm parallel to its investment activities.
And it was, you know, it had a big impact then. But so he's always written. Thiel is also a publisher, right? He co-wrote with David Sachs in the 1990s The Diversity Myth, his first book, which was, well, he was at Stanford or just afterwards. They co-founded this conservative newspaper, the Stanford Review, and The Diversity Myth was something that they wrote then. But also,
what was The Diversity Myth about?
It was culture war stuff from the 1990s.
Wow.
So, like the first, like political correctness.
It was against political correctness.
Right.
It was against universities making quotas for racial-based quotas. You know?
Affirmative action.
Yeah,
Right.
And it was like, wasn't the first round of that, but as you know, in the 90s, it was also a discourse in the art world. Like, it was very present. So they were on the first train of that. And David Sachs, as you know, is now the quote-unquote AI Tsar.
Right.
But I think
for Trump.
his time finished, so he's now not.
He's now not. Also, side note, but like, why use the terminology of Tsar?
I know.
Yeah, like,
Well-
I feel like nobody's unpacked that, but like, why would you take on an authoritarian, hierarchy-based Russian terminology for your,
Well, that's the thing.
liberal
It's a
government?
bad world fit.
Yeah.
But I think this is also
Remember
a bit of a like.
Marco Rubio was the viceroy of Venezuela.
Right, true.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think also this is a little bit of low resolution grabbing at terms that assert power. Like, I think it's just
Maybe.
not that.
It's not that deliberate.
But
Anyway.
it is interesting. I mean, it is deliberate, though. Department of War. I mean,
Yeah, I
all these
think
things
it
are. There's
resonates,
like a.
you know? Yeah.
But I think it's as off the cuff as like one night someone just called him that and he decided to own it as like a power bro agentic move.
Yeah, and it also has a liberal rage baity thing. Like, so liberals like me are raged by using
Right.
it. So it's perfect, I guess.
Yeah.
It's an attention
So it's-
economy hack as well.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, Thiel's second thing is 0 to 1, of course, which I saw on every startup desk that I went to around the world, from New Zealand to China to Australia to South America in the 2010s. That was hugely influential.
Also, sorry, it just dawned on me that 2 South Africans published the diversity myth in the 1990s.
Well, yeah, Thiel spent time in South Africa. He's, German by birth, right?
Right.
But,
right.
But yeah,
They all have a South African connection.
Yeah,
though.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
very strange. Okay.
Again, like, we can talk about biography and leveraging
let's
biography
not.
for it. No, it's true. And yeah, but Mark Andreessen was the guy who drew me to defense tech because he published an exceptionally interesting text. It was called the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, and it was basically making the case for their quote-unquote American dynamism portfolio, which was Andreessen Horowitz's explicit pivot to defense tech, and funding it. It had other infrastructural things in there too, like nationally focused supply chains and stuff like that. It's not only defense tech, but defense tech was like the loudest sound that came out of American dynamism. And, even just the term dynamism.
Yeah.
So he explicitly referenced Marinetti in this text.
Just to slow down for 1 second, F.T. Marinetti, like father of futurism, wrote the Futurist Manifesto. And
wrote many manifestos. That's
true.
the thing. There's like hundreds,
But 1909
that's
is
the
when,
first one.
and
yeah.
this is pre-World War I.
In a way,
World
kind of
War
a
I.
long time before, 5 years before World War I. That's the
Right.
thing.
Okay, right.
But it's kind of coming out of this period of international globalism, like the late 1890s, and
Changes afoot.
yeah, and culturally changes afoot, politically changes afoot. And Marinetti was really interested in lots of fringe things, lots of fringe politics, but he was also interested in mass media and the emergence of the way that doing provocative, rage-baity things in public created a lot of heat. And he was really clever at, I think the first manifesto was published in a French newspaper that was the hippest newspaper in Europe for cultural things.
People were so aware of the feedback loop of media during the time.
There was a lot of theorizing about it too. No?
And also artists at the time. You think of, this is Emmeline Butterfield Rosen, her thesis of Seurat. A lot of these artists departing from the classical modes of art, they're so interested in how what they do is received by the press.
Yeah.
And they are creating in response to that. The press is already part of the apparatus at that time. Fully.
Exactly. And these guys were super sharp, really good at manipulating it.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of them, but Marinetti was also amazing with words, But the content, of course, was like transgressive on purpose
for
as well.
instance, war is the world's
Hygiene. That's that's the most famous futurist line from some of those early manifestos. Also, it was like masculinist, it was imperialist, it was, it was very aggressive culture, and it was kind of right adjacent culture already, but it led into the same scenes that also produced the first instance of fascism as well, because it was socially and creatively around the people instrumentalized in the end by the formation of the Fascist Party by Mussolini. So it was very
But we're talking about,
edgy.
so from 1909 and presumably a bit before until like
A 15-year period, kind of, yeah.
or even longer. Because Mussolini, we're talking mid 1920s.
So March on Rome was 23, I think, and he did a bunch of stuff towards the end of the teens that was about setting up that thing. So he was, as you know, the editor-in-chief of the key socialist newspaper, but was hanging out with all these edgy political types. Yeah, anyway, but so...
This new tech elite is really interested in
mass media.
And narrative
and
and
media.
affect and transgression. I think that's the other thing that the futurists were really super interested in was like the performance of transgression and what that could do creatively if you just, move fast and break things.
Yeah. Be agentic. Don't think, just do.
Exactly. All these things they were super interested in. And they were also interested in emergence. It's a very complicated package, the futurist thing. But it was one of the kind of core modernist movements that was taking things from the modernist soup that was around. Like, Dadaists were also around the same time. Cubism slightly predated futurism, and some of the visual things that you associate with Cubism also came up in futurist painting, like this fracturing of the surface and the making unfamiliar, the recognition that technical images and photography,
the flattening of three-dimensional forms
was
something
really
more abstract.
That was doing so much for representation. Then what could you do that was not that? If you were going to keep using painting, like what could painting bring in terms of describing how the world felt to people that photography couldn't do?
At the time, how much did tech industry figures, though, embrace futurism?
So maybe just some points to hang this all on. First wave, second wave futurism is some imperfect way to describe some moments of futurism, but basically art historians, particularly liberal art historians, have periodized futurism to, the first futurism starts in 1909 with Marinetti's thing, but runs up and through the First World War, and that is seen as kind of distinctly a different vibe than the second futurism, which kind of starts with the emergence of fascism and is much more entangled with the regime explicitly and kind of works for Mussolini and becomes some kind of official state.
That might be too neat of a narrative. I mean, that's probably not totally
It's too tidy,
true.
and there's a lot of amazing discourse around it, but also just to give some other key points of that, generally the first futurists are seen to be obsessed with cars and the automobile and Fiat and all these Italian cars that were coming up at the time. I think that the industrial people were very excited about futurists making these kinds of images. Also in Germany, there was some excitement about that.
Think of the Autobahn. Think of images, racing, speed.
But just like cars. I mean, cars at that time were just really new and it was super fast, and getting in a car was fucking crazy. And there was an affective thing, there was an emotional thing, and there was a descriptive thing that people like Giacomo Bella were trying to describe, and these more abstract early images that were made in the 19-teens. It's less representational, the first round of futurism as well.
Yeah.
It's more kind of like crazy lines doing, movement, trying to distill what it looks like to capture velocity, to capture breaking through. And that was very focused on the car, And then the kind of second wave futurists are often more associated with the airplane and the difference of perspective that you do when you kind of leave the ground. It has a similar kind of velocity rush, but you also, and this is where the kind of domination stuff comes in to second wave futurism often more. This is again interpretation that's quite common if you read it in art history, the top-down looking of the bomber. You're going in, you're flying, you can dominate from above. And this is the kind of also political distinctions that get made between the first and the second wave futurists.
And it abstracts the human scale entirely.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like this kind of stuff that Germany's often associated with, unpacking with the Nazis, the mechanization of killing and stuff. It's similar in that way. So that's maybe a distinction. And I think, in both cases, they were quite close to industry in that sense. In the first wave, Balla in his car, Marinetti in his car, there's these amazing pictures of them. And then second wave futurists, the one that I've looked at the most is Tullio Crelli. He was sent up with bombers to kind of be with the rush of the attack.
He was embedded so that he could see it.
He was embedded within the military.
So this is an art movement, an avant-garde, but that's fully embedded with the state and industry.
Totally. There's a really great book called Politics and Aesthetics that was written in the early 1990s, which is also talking about the political life of futurists through this period, through the whole period, through 40 years of futurism.
Right.
And it was, there were moments of adoption and alignment, there was moments of pushback, there were some communist futurists, there were some, there's a futurist democratic manifesto, would you believe? So it's not only fascistic culture that they produced, but of course they were mostly aligned to it. I mean, Marinetti even went right up into the end with Mussolini, even in the kind of last pathetic iteration of the... I mean, it's a very sad story, actually, the whole futurist story. It's
How does it end?
Well, I mean...
How did that iteration end?
Yeah, he died not that long after Mussolini was murdered. Anyway, I mean, to bring it back to Andreessen,
Well, I mean, you have, just to say you have car.
Yeah.
You have air, a certain kind of domination, and now it's like AI. I mean, that would be what the tech...
I mean, again, I can only speculate. I've not talked to Mark Andreessen about this, but it's been interesting for me to actually. That was one of the questions I asked myself. Like when I first read the Andreessen document, I was like, why is Andreessen reaching for art and culture in general?
Yeah.
He doesn't have to reach for culture. There's many engineering or whatever arguments you could bring to why this is important. But what is useful for him in reaching back towards futurism, And I don't know the answer to that, but I found it compelling to speculate on that.
So what are some of the theories that came up for you?
Well, I mean, I think if you're trying to move back into telling a different story about why it's important to arm and why it's important to make arms companies and fund them and why it's important for the state to do that and why it's important culturally for citizens to get behind that, maybe a cultural angle is useful, right? And where do you find technology meets, legitimization of violence in modernism? Futurism's a very easy reach for that. And it sounds good, I guess, to a technologist, right? It's the future. We're not talking about the past. Fuck the past is over. Burn it down.
Right.
But move fast and break things.
Sort of, of course, but by talking about futurism, you're de facto also looking back.
Yeah, that's the wonderful irony of it. Yeah,
and which is kind of interesting. Furthermore, these companies, they name themselves after these Tolkien references, like Palantir and Anduril, this kind of timeless Middle Earth, this kind of neo-retro Middle Ages fascination meets like a future, right? So it's not just futurism. These are very specific historical references that Andreessen and others in the industry are pulling from. But they're also doing this with like a Tolkien kind of lore, where it's like a timelessness. Like maybe, we're going all over the place. I hope listeners are okay with this, but it is kind of fun to just get in the mix. I almost
Carly,
want to.
that's what we do.
You say just get into it.
Emergent models.
That's the end. Yes. Exactly, emergent models. Maybe we can just unpack some of these imageries because there's looking.
We
at
can also
some
talk
of the,
about Tolkien because there is something relevant across the board.
Okay, but definitely, I do want to get into Tolkien, but actually, I just want to stay in this aesthetic zone for a second. So we're talking about futurism. You very nicely animated what the futurist aesthetic is, especially the Tullio Crowley. This vision of dominance. If you have escape velocity, if you're looking down from the air, the kind of dominance that perspective gives you. One can draw an analogy to having control over information with a good AI agent and a good corpus. There's a similarity.
It's also like a spectacular affective rush also, right? It's like a kind of aesthetic description of like the rush of flying, the rush of this attack of war that these guys were trying to describe,
And it feels like somehow you have control over time as well, or you're going faster than time.
And then the early futurists, which I think is also relevant, like with these more abstract images that came from, Giacomo Belli, you can see him making drawings of his car. And then suddenly they just become what are then kind of known as lines of force, which is such a beautiful terminology, I think, as well.
Torque lines or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's also like if you think of a futurist image and these jagged lines that kind of make up and break up the picture plane. Like the futurists called them lines of force, and it was sort of tracing where the movement was in a way, But that was also the early futurists and the kind of abstractness feeling of those images that they created was also about describing something that was the unknown, describing the emergence. I think they also kind of imaged transgression. I think that was also about it. These kind of violent, jagged explosions of unknownness. I think that was also about what the and I also think the Andreessen world, if I can project onto it, is also reaching for that. I think they're very clear about emergence. They're like, we don't know what technology is going to bring when we open the door, but that's not a reason not to open the door. You don't want to regulate because you want to let what will happen. We shouldn't be so arrogant to think what we know, what we're making. We don't. Even the people making and especially with AI, right? We don't know what these things are. We don't really know how they work, but this kind of emergence is profound, and I think this is also, again, if I can project on why futurism is useful for that mindset, it's because it's also describing an emergent unknown, that is transgressive and destructive by nature, but also kind of ultimately creative, and new.
Right. What is Karp's line? All there is the artist in the work.
Incredible,
But let's talk about this mindset. Like, what are some of the foundational truths that people who are working in this sphere that are responsible for putting out marketing images that are drawing from this repository of futurist imagery, what are their beliefs? Anduril just had a book published about it by one of its primary VC firms, and they really emphasized what a destructive force Fukuyama has been to America's understanding of itself. The end of history hurt America more than anyone is kind of there. So
we are well into the end of history.
We are
or
far,
history
history's
too.
bad. History too, exactly.
For the record, I like Fukuyama.
Yeah, so same. I don't say this as a qualitative that I agree with it.
But this is what they're talking about. This is the story they're
foundational
telling.
truth.
Yeah.
So what is that story?
So I think the best analog for this story is actually the book that was written by the CEO of Palantir, Alexander Karp. He wrote a book called The Technological Republic. It's very analogous to the types of stories that are going around the American dynamism space. Alexander Karp is a very interesting figure in and of himself, and somebody that I've made art about a number of times, actually, in the past, prior to this. Palantir obviously co-founded with Peter Thiel as well, so it's from that same kind of universe we were talking about of kind of intellectuals and influencers that are also founders and conservative politicians. Even though Karp always claims he's a liberal as an interesting flex.
School trained,
you know?
liberal.
But yeah, and his mother is this amazing artist, though I've only seen work from the 1980s, which I included in a show that I made in New Zealand, co-curated with a friend of mine, Karamia Muller. The mother's really interesting, but Karp's book is maybe the best analogy for the story that's being told, which is, again, kind of a cool bullshit story on the liberal world. It's like J.D. Vance's speech as well in the Munich Security Conference, where he's saying, hey, this Fukuyama narrative is nonsense. This rules-based order thing is stupid. Also, what Silicon Valley's been doing and the way they've been talking about what they've been doing in the mid-2010s is nonsense. We've been making inconsequential bullshit companies that make things that don't make sense. Like, who cares about delivery apps? It's not transformative. What's really transformative and what Silicon Valley was born doing, right, is collaborating with the military and collaborating with the defense, which is true, right? Like the capital and the early companies that make up the mythos and the history of Silicon Valley companies did get a lot of their funding from the Defense Department in many different guises over the years. And, you know, they often cite this moment where Google was asked to do this military contract in the mid-2010s, and there was a lot of pushback from the workers, from the engineers, and from other people who were non-technical workers at Google saying, no, we don't want to support the military. This is like not what Google's about. And they forced Google to say, no, we're not going to take this military contract. And this is something that Karp et al. Are calling bullshit on. They're like, no, this is what we've always done. It's really important that we do collaborate with the military. We're exactly the right people to build this. You're crazy if you think we don't need a military. You're also crazy if you think we're going to build it in China. It needs to be done under our sphere of influence, blah, blah, blah. And that's the claim that they're making. So it's a continuity claim. It's an existential claim. It's also an ethical claim. That's also challenging the ethics that say we shouldn't build weapons. They're saying, no, actually we should, and this is the correct moral thing to do. You know, they sort of flip that on its head. So
right now, Anduril, it primes its employees to receive pushback.
Yeah.
And it makes the employees own that dissonance.
Yeah.
Like, it has this poster that it sells that says Anduril is literally obsessed with America. And, like, you should be so proud to be making things that will defend
being
America.
a patriot is hip, you know?
And exactly. And like people may say, why are you making weapons? And then the answer is
because we have to make weapons because we always have.
Right. Pacifism is a privilege of the protected.
Exactly.
And like those who believe in pacifism are weak, and we are the ones who are allowing them to say that because we are going to make the weapons that make their lives easy.
For the record, I grew up a pacifist because my mother's a Quaker. So pacifism is a rhetoric I know very well.
Yes.
You know?
I mean, I also am not criticizing this either.
No,
I'm saying this is I don't like killing a fly. I mean, it gives me pain to kill a spider. Really, I only say this because that's the rhetoric that they use when they employ people, and they set you up for that.
They had this amazing campaign also that made a lot of impact, which was called Don't Work for Anduril.
Right.
The star of the campaign was the kind of weak Silicon Valley liberal worker, you know, sort of a parody of the type of person that might have walked out in the Google thing, you know, who comes along and is like, oh, but actually I need to go home at X amount of time. Oh, I don't feel so good about this.
He has a mustache and glasses.
Yeah, he has a mustache and glasses. And it's sort of this pre-co-option of the pushback on why would you work for a military defense company.
Exactly.
You know?
And then if you wanted to own that, then you're like transgressive.
Yeah.
And therefore it's very cool to work here, and you're the most badass guy walking down the street.
Right, which resonates with this general cultural phenomenon that Trump et al. Leveraged of the hip transgressive right-wing person, you know? and the hip conservative, which is it's hip to be square kind of
right.
weird.
Because
I
it's
don't know if
real.
that's the right capture for it, but yeah.
I mean, and you increasingly see part of their audience anytime they make a public message is their employee base.
Yeah.
Like when the new CEO of Condé Nast was recently interviewed, he was talking about maintaining a DEI agenda even after that wave has passed, and now that it creates maybe a risk given the new head of the American FCC is saying
you might turn into 60 Minutes if you
exactly. So you shouldn't say this publicly, and he goes, no, but for us it's really important. And then the interviewer is like, who are you saying this for? And he's like, current and future contributors, employees.
Yeah.
And so increasingly you have companies who are marketing to their potential employee base.
I do have one question about one thing I can't quite figure out about these guys is where hyper-financialized capitalism, basically like what Mark Pollux and Roberto Alonso Trio called exocapitalism, where that fits into this. Because in a way, capitalism really rewards all of the rentier middleman stack layers Karp criticizes, right? And if you look at before American dynamism, I mean, A16Z was like a huge funder of crypto and the metaverse, all of this, what I just call like profit slop, like things that generate a ton of profit without actually producing anything.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't know if you have a sense of what their relationship is to this kind of hyper-financialized capitalism that doesn't actually seem to produce much for their grand dynamic vision.
Well, I mean,
but at the same time, they rely on it, right?
I think that's the key point, is capitalism always needs hard power. I mean, maybe anybody always needs hard power, but specifically capitalism needs hard power and has used coercive power or the threat of it to set up the market conditions that are then kind of naturalized to make the system work, right? So this is the kind of next stage on that. So even to have, many bots and agents flying around the world doing whatever, abstracted layer after abstracted layer of capital performances and lifting off the earth, like the exocapitalism thesis is, you still need the hard power that defends the hardware or whatever,
Right.
Right. You still need to be able to disincentivize, you still need to be able to coerce, and you still need to be able to make the systems that do that, right? And I guess that's the way it fits together.
So I guess capitalism as it operates now essentially still evades critique from these people.
Even though they're capitalists. They love it.
If you look at the system right now, it directly incentivizes and greatly rewards the exact kinds of platforms that Karp criticizes and makes it very difficult to actually build anything material, right?
Okay, this is now I kind of cotton onto part of what you're saying, which I didn't catch before. Yeah, Karp is criticizing the type of businesses that anyway are part of the thing that they're defending or whatever, And I mean, Thiel or Andreessen, let's say, they funded those companies that Karp is criticizing as well, right? So they directly benefit from but this is just the kind of renewal of the cycle, right? It's kind of a fashion-based thing, right? It's like, we've built out Facebook. We don't need to build another Facebook. Facebook is done. What's a new story that can legitimize something? It's okay to push back against something we own. That's fine. It's also part of this taking both sides power, right? We're going to poo-poo Facebook, even though Oculus, the former founder of Anduril, was a Facebook acqui-hire employee, whatever, before he was fired for being a Trump PAC supporter, and then reaffirmed when it was seen to be advantageous to be on the Trump side again. But they're poo-pooing their own products, absolutely. Know. But these contradictions are built into the model, I would say.
But there's also
they know they're doing that,
right? There's this kind of amazing way that, how when we say, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and so it means that we have a problem getting oil shipments around the world, but that obviously doesn't just affect energy, it affects making clothes and fertilizer and all this stuff. And oil
and it advantages companies that have domestic energy production like the US, for example.
Exactly.
Oil's the new data.
Oil's the new data. And then you have data and you're like, I can just set up a few agents to make me new media based on my old work. There's a way that anything can become anything. Julian, you were fascinated by how trees are made predominantly of air, which is fascinating,
yes, it just cleaves carbon off of carbon dioxide, and that's actually the carbon that the tree is made of.
Right.
Fucking magnets, how do they work?
I know, it really is like that. But there is a sense now, if you look at Elon's companies, I think this was an FT op-ed or something, but it's he's constantly just sort of gray gooing new companies into being, like out of old things. He just buys X and turns it into an AI company, which is now like a rocket company, which is now I'm not criticizing this either.
But I think
I'm just
Musk
saying,
is a really interesting
so just let me just make the sort of meta point here is that there is this feeling in the tech world now. It used to be if you were going to commit to building cars, you had to fucking commit to making cars because you had to get the steel contracts and the supply chains and the labor, and you have to like line all this up and buy the real estate. And like now data centers are built to be knocked down in 10 years so that a more efficient model could potentially be built. So everything feels like it's in this like, I mean, great goo is the wrong word, but that's just the term that's always in my head.
Everything is the same substrate, even the
Opposing
abstract
things.
and the material.
Right. And like when you ask Claude,
Very dialectical.
Like, no, it is. And you ask Claude, like, what's the U.S. defense budget like for 2027? And it can't give you an answer just because it's like what value is on that scale is so abstracted that it actually can't give you a precise number. You know, somewhere upwards of 900 billion. That's, you know, maybe somewhere around 3% of U.S. GDP or something like that. These numbers are maybe not exactly right, but it can't give you anything concrete. And I'm interested when I look at, I'm coming all the way back around to futurist aesthetics, where you also have this dissolution of this classical kind of realism that had dominated art up until the end of the 19th century. You have a great liberation of form that's happening. So somewhere all these things to me are very connected. But it's interesting that like in the 19-teens and 1920s, industrial and technological development required a lot of hard and fixed decision making. I'm going to make this computer and it's going to be as big as a building, and it's going to sit there for a long time. Now everything feels like it's this kind of flow, like trees being made out of the carbon in the air, cleaving off like trillions here and there to have collateral for
data centers springing up from software.
Well,
right?
I mean,
I think where this also connects to like the rhetorical strategies and kind of cultural interests of these actors, like the Musk example is a really good one.
Go there.
You know, I was really helped by Quinn Slobodian's book Muskism, which is a really amazing analysis of Musk. And it talked about how like the other thing they kind of play both sides of, because you're always sort of playing both sides of it. You're fluidly not only moving between states, but you're moving between ideological positions and strategies as well. You're constantly ready to adopt the emergent new thing, even if it completely contradicts the thing that you were doing before. One of the more obvious and interesting parts is like the relationship to the state, right? So, you know, you have this kind of like anti-state rhetoric, seasteading, build a new state, network state, you know, we want to get out of states, you know, and it's you all the way over to the opposite to no, actually rather it's better to co-opt the state and then be the state. And then, you know.
The state is the biggest client.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Thiel now runs Argentina.
Is attempting to. It's very hard to get signal versus noise on that.
Right,
but like,
true,
there's definitely some moves in Argentina, you know, from that faction. And also, if you read this Javier Milei thing that came out on the FT the other day, which actually there's this quite good counter to that by
set up the first thing. So it's Milei,
president of Argentina.
He's the guy who gave Musk the chainsaw.
Exactly. And he invented the chainsaw meme, actually. Like there was something that, and he is actually, ideologically speaking, somebody who comes from this very far right, but kind of more like MIT far right world of, like, you know, Murray Rothbard. He's a Rothbard enthusiast, you know, this like very hard.
Was he educated in the States?
No, but like he's this massive fan of kind of like center right or whatever, like not fascist supposedly, but the kind of far right end of the neoliberal camp. People like Murray Rothbard, which is like, you know, slash the government's the problem, all this Reagan-esque stuff as well, right? So he's the leader, and he published a text, which is a very coherent text. One wonders who wrote that text actually, under his name in the FT and the Financial Times, which was claiming like, okay, AI should be able to be a person like a corporation is. That was a huge advantage for capitalism. This is why Amsterdam became the center of the world during the early moments of capitalism, because of the joint stock company
Dutch
was
East
existed.
India Company.
Yeah. And the next step in that logical development is we need to make AI agents able to be persons as well, legally, because that would kind of unlock all this
and take away all
innovation.
restrictions. Because to your point before, this is inevitable anyway. Like our restrictions are going to be janky. People will find workarounds. Just like let it rip.
So it's like the equivalent of having a mailbox office in Delaware, except you have a Mac Mini in Buenos Aires.
Yeah. But exactly, or not in Buenos Aires, right? Yeah, they would be the first jurisdiction that would allow it, like a little bit like Switzerland was the first jurisdiction to legally allow cryptocurrencies to exist. Like it would be this kind of like breaking boundaries moment of what was possible, which he claims will do something like what happened in Amsterdam, where joint stock companies became like something that really unlocked a lot of capital and development, et cetera. That's the positive story he's telling. So today, published in the same newspaper, the Financial Times, Noah Harari, who wrote *Sapiens*.
*Sapiens*, yeah.
This popular historian, I guess. He wrote a pushback on Millet's
claims,
I
haven't read it yet.
Saying like, yes, indeed, the joint stock company did do a lot for capital and open up a bunch of innovation, but is Argentina going to become Amsterdam or is it going to become Indonesia? Like where actually it had a lot of negative impacts and caused a lot of destruction and in the end was lost anyway, So is Buenos Aires, Amsterdam or Jakarta? That's the question. Yeah. So if you're going to invoke this history of all this capital that was unlocked, like which side are you actually on when you do that?
Or will you end up on?
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is a very good point, But yeah, this co-option of the state, and I think to go back to Musk, all his companies need the state of the US to exist. And the more closer adoption of being the government, being the infrastructure for the government is the power move, not the build a network state somewhere else where you try to be outside of jurisdictions and act as this kind of... So this moving fluidly between ideological positions, between tactics, I think this is part of the playbook of using emergence, of being open to whatever advantage emerges from the new situation.
So the model is really set up situations where emergence can happen and then be very quick to spot what's good
protocol
from it.
art.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, but it kind of is. It's like set up the conditions, right? And then like claim the good output as yours.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
It.
Yeah, and I think the reason why technologists have an advantage with this is, of course, like, as Andreessen also claims, they're building new systems that do genuinely new things in terms of, there's lots of old in the new always, but new emergences are possible when you change the platform, right? Or change the state, let's say, And if you're the first person to see that, because you're on the front end of the development of that, then you have a time advantage in seeing what's going to be the emergent thing. I also think, with Musk buying Twitter, I think he saw what was so powerful about social media and politics. Things that trended on these platforms were taking over people's minds. And then, of course, then you want to own that and you want to be the guy that sees all the data behind. So, maybe Musk is only an opportunist and not an ideologue. Like looking at a jurisdiction, let's say you bring up Germany and you say, okay, what has the most support and what gets people the most riled up on X in Germany at the moment? It's this talking point. I'm just going to say that stuff.
Totally.
And then I get all the power that those talking points have. Do I believe behind it? Who cares? It's not the point. The point is power. The point is...
It's like you saw the Cambridge Analytica model. He's like, oh, no, I'm just going to... There's a better way to reread
Cambridge
that.
Analytica did their own version of that, right? Because, what did they actually do? Who knows,
Right.
I also just recently started reading this book by this New Zealander who was the first kind of diplomat for Facebook, and she did a lot of the growth around the world of, talking to governments, convincing them to come onto Facebook, and then she wrote this damning account of what the nuts and bolts of doing that behind was. It's a very interesting book. It's called Careless People, named after this F. Scott Fitzgerald idea that were these kind of irresponsible actors who were wealthy and then would kind of disappear back into their wealth once they'd gone and wrecked everybody else's lives. That's what it's named after. But I also think that's something that describes also some of the nuts and bolts of this type of opportunism, if that's a way to call it, or whatever. Emergencism. I don't know what the right terminology is. But if you can see the thing first, then, of course, you have a first mover advantage constantly.
Right.
The amount of resentment of wokeness, I think, drives so much of this. And they also saw this kind of
opportunity.
Also a very radical set of ideas and behaviors be wholesale adopted and enforced by society entirely through the internet and realize we need to focus on aesthetics, focus on narrative, get more control on the platforms, flood it with content, hire departments of storytellers, right? This is all very deliberate.
You pull up your Palantir dashboard of your X model of everybody, what they're saying right now, and you say, okay, that's huge. What's the counter-narrative to that? Deploy. That's huge. What's the counter-narrative to that? Deploy. That's how you operate, and I don't... Does that has an ideology, but it's not what's nominally being spoken.
Wait, do you think that actually is part of Palantir?
If you've made it this far, you already know New Models is for you. Subscribe now at newmodels.substack.com or patreon.com/newmodels for all of our full episodes and the hundreds more in our archive.